are you talking about Dale?
Yeah.
He did. I didn't hear him.
Oh, this month.
No, he did talk to me this month. He didn't tell me her name, but he said he was gonna talk to her first.
Oh, okay.
And he wanted to just make sure she was okay with that, and then he'd get back to her. I said, that's great,
Since I put her, she wanted to come to church a while ago.
That's
Now
what
she's
she told
not
me.
Did you-
well enough.
Pass out stuff? I didn't get something?
Yeah.
You were back there and then you moved up there. She put them over there. You bypassed her.
Sorry.
A pat head of a sort back here.
There you go.
Yes, we got our dinner for tonight.
That's the young couple that sits back here, right where, Robert and Ann are sitting, have their two young children.
The little girl that does it.
Yes.
She wanted to introduce herself to me this morning, and they don't.
At church? Oh, I don't know.
Long time ago.
Oh, now that might have been, oh, what's his name? Our niece?
Trenton, no.
Trenton's
I
long
don't
time
think
curly
so.
hair.
No, it wasn't his mother.
Oh, because she was here this morning.
I saw her.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, her name is Carla.
Did you have a handout for last week?
Melinda has them, but she didn't bring them tonight.
Okay.
But she'll get those too.
I got
Just,
two.
we watched it online, but we didn't.
They weren't.
I don't know
You
what
can have
happened
this
last
one.
week.
Oh, okay, I see it now.
Yeah.
No, she wasn't.
No.
You see it?
Just look.
Yes. Okay.
You got yours and Sharon.
And yours.
No, I was talking to her. And I'm not sure what her it is.
He's been visiting, he was soon going. He sits over
Pick up a
there.
handout.
Two children.
Oh, where are they?
Mine.
Are they over there?
Where's the police?
Stephen is his
Okay.
first name. But he's got two children. Mine,
Atheism.
his dark hair. Oh, he sat right over there this morning. But he was
And it starts over.
not today.
That's what
I
Wendy. That's the case. Yeah, he has them every other weekend.
That's what.
But I think she
Here's
might
six.
be here tonight.
Oh, good, thanks.
Hi.
I ended up with,
Stephen is down.
I think,
Oh,
extra,
okay.
so
Oh, okay.
somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
He said Lila wanted to come.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. I did.
Just want to let you know that even though you guys are sitting like Baptists, we have a brand new microphone, and even a whisper back here is heard.
Oh,
We're real fortunate.
Oh, I'm sorry. And you must be with the Grooms family.
I got a copy of
I'm
six.
just kidding.
We can make
Sit wherever you want.
for last week.
I get it. I don't know.
You get it? Well, I might have a copy.
Walking up.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
Back up.
There's all kinds of coffee back there, if anybody needs any coffee.
Alex Springdale.
This is measured it, I mean, I felt it. Yeah, the coaster.
Oh, it's a fancy coaster.
Yeah.
Are you gonna start us off? Are you gonna start us off?
I can.
One needs her microphone.
Yeah, I got
It's
it.
on.
Oh,
I got it, just haven't put it on
That
yet.
would drive me up the wall.
Are we ready?
All the way
Melody's
from
gonna
my
start
family,
us
and I
off.
knew that my neighborhood was destroyed. I had shingles off my house. I'm going home.
A cartoon.
There's no way. Like, okay,
What would you want?
yeah.
Just waiting for the, go.
Start.
Are we on now? Oh, hello. It's good to see everybody on our last session, dealing with another gospel, and thank you for those of you in the building coming out on this cold, wet night, and for the people online who have been so faithful. A lot of them have been following right along. If you need copies of handouts, I have copies of all of this. We have them on the SRB drive. If there's anything that you need, you can let me know, and I will get you the copies of any of the handouts, even on down the road. If there's something you say, oh, I want to read that again, just let me know. And is that it? Is that all the news? I think so. Let's start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity that we have had to come together and learn about you, about your word, and about how to teach people and encourage them to find out who you are. Father, that is the goal for all of us, is to be closer to you. So we are so thankful that you've given us your word, and that your word never fails us and it never changes. Help us to understand it, and then to be able to use that truth to help others. We pray now that you will bless this time together. Thank you for Wanda, and please bless her as she presents tonight. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
I want to just mention the handout that you have for tonight, and let me put this on. Yep, the handout that you have tonight is a toolbox of all of the resources that we've used, plus a few extra throughout the time. So you've got it in one space altogether. So tonight we're talking about cosmic child abuse, which is the last content chapter, and then the conclusion, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what do we do now that we know things. And we know the fallacies, we know some of the answers to fallacies. What do we do with it? And so we're going to go back and review something that we did earlier with that. But I have a mug, and I was going to bring it, but it was in the dishwasher, which was running when I left the house. And I told Melanie, I said, I'm going to use this mug instead because it kind of portrays the same thing in a nicer way. My mug says, I'm not grumpy, I'm just sick of heresy. And as we work through a lot of this, Melanie can tell you my mood just gets worse and worse and worse, because you find out what people are thinking, and it hurts your heart and it makes me mad. But C.S. Lewis had the right idea, as he often did. And what this mug says, you want to read it to them?
It says, I want God, not my idea of God.
And I think that's really kind of a nicer way of saying I'm sick of heresy, is that when we know that God is God and we are not, and we want the real thing. It's kind of like a bride who finds out that she got a piece of glass instead of a diamond. We don't want the piece of glass. We want the real diamond. We want the real thing because we know there is God, and we can't just manufacture God. We don't have anything to fall back on. When we need comfort, when terrible things happen, we don't have anything if it's the God we made up. And so we know that there is something real, and it bothers us when people are going after the counterfeit. And so that's a hard thing to take. But I do want to mention, this is a quote by C.S. Lewis, and it's something that I've been thinking about for months. I came across it a couple of months ago, and it's like, this is something we really need to be aware of and think about. He, the devil, always sends errors into the world in pairs of opposites. He relies on your extra dislike of one to draw you gradually to the opposite one. And I think there's a lot of truth there, because it's easy for us to be really outraged at heresy and slide into being very judgmental and angry and bitter and all of those things that are also wrong. And so it's something that I thought about a lot in working with this material, is that we do kind of have to be careful that we don't slide into the opposite side. And that's easy for me. I have always thought, I would have been such a good Pharisee. You know, I love rules for
Me
other
too.
people. I enjoy enforcing rules for other people. And so that's something that's really a natural fit for me, is to get into being just very judgmental of other people. And that's something I have to keep in my mind all the time. It's easy to get so outraged over here that I am drawn to the equally wrong thing over here. And so just something that I thought about and thought I was driven to share.
It's an interesting thought.
It is an interesting thought. I have them on occasion. A lot of them I shouldn't mention out loud, but I do have them. Into our content for tonight, cosmic child abuse. And this is something that if you do any reading of the progressives, you're going to see this over and over and over, that there was no need for Jesus to die. I saw something that was just quite shocking to me. I didn't bring it. It's not part of our handouts or anything, but it was in U.S. Catholic or Catholic Today, something like that, that said there was no need for the atonement. And I thought, you have a crucifix. There is a need. How can you say that when you have a crucifix hanging right there? We know that there is a need for atonement. And it was just because God doesn't, God is patient, God is kind, and God would not require a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice of our time. It's a sacrifice of, our patience and being, right living. But there was no need for a blood sacrifice. And so we see this progressive thought slipping into even really mainstream historic aspects that we would never imagine we would see. And it's something we have to be careful about. And it's one of those things that when we talk about how good God is, and yet Jesus was put to death. And it was within God's plan. How can that be good? I'll tell you a story, and it's something that really disturbs me. I used to teach children's Sunday school, and the class one time that I was teaching it was right at Easter, and so we were talking about Good Friday. And there was a little girl, 4th grade, and she said, in our house, we call it Bad Friday. And I said, well, it's a terrible thing that we have to think about, that Jesus died, but he died for us, and so that our sin could be taken away, and da-da-da. I'm explaining it to her, and she said, I told my dad it was bad for Jesus to die. So in our house, it is Bad Friday. And her parents, she said, so my dad said, we'll just call it Bad Friday from now on. And that family, this happened maybe 10 years ago, and they're no longer in our church. And that really, I don't know what happened. I don't know, but I have often wondered, do we start thinking it's Bad Friday, we don't really need the atonement, so why should I be in church? I don't know. It's just something that I put together in my brain, which very often misfires. But it's that kind of thing that can so easily creep in, of how can we think of it being Good Friday when Jesus died the death that he did? And it's a hard concept to think, but he died for me. It is good. I can be united with God forever. That is good. And that's where we have to keep our eyes. But it's it's hard to explain sometimes to people who are resistant. But the point there, as I sometimes miss, the point was these are things that just creep in so easily, and it's hard to get them nailed down sometimes. So, Elisa said on page 201, Elisa said, an attack on the cross is an attack on the very core of what it means to be a Christian and on the nature of God himself. Now, if you remember last week listening to Rob Bell, and he talked about this is the worst monster you could put together, and we call him God because of having to have this, put his son to death and that sort of thing. That is an attack on the nature of God. And I think that's kind of what Elisa is talking about here. That might have been Richard Rohr who made the monster remark. So how do progressives characterize the cross? Does anybody, what are the arguments that you think could be used? I'm using wait time. Teachers have to do that. It becomes uncomfortable.
What I hear is it's a myth.
It's a
It
myth.
happened.
It's a myth that it happened. That it wasn't really the Son of God. It was a mythological kind of a thing. Dominic Crossan, if you've ever come across Dominic Crossan, he has written a book called How to Read the Bible and Stay a Christian. And what he does is contrast the God of the Old Testament, where we have a lot of immediate judgments, and the New Testament, where we are living in grace, and saying they're two different people. How do you reconcile one with the other? And he is gaining in popularity. He said that 20 years ago, he says, I was considered so left-wing, out there. It's crazy. Today I'm speaking 40, 50 times a year. And so, and he's 90. So for him to get around 40 or 50 times a year is pretty good. But he's saying it is moving more mainstream. My ideas are moving more mainstream. And what he says, very similar, is he compares Jesus to Roman gods and goddesses who supposedly came down through Zeus and back up and could come back and forth, and that it is a myth. Jesus' death was a myth. He said he believes Jesus was resurrected if you consider it to be a metaphor, but not as a person being, resurrected, because in his mind, Jesus died as a will of the people and to show nonviolent resistance to the Roman government as an example for us to follow. It's so far from reality. It's so far from the truth. So progressives will come up with all kinds of other ideas as to why Jesus died, because it's Jesus died. I think even the skeptic Bart Ehrman, that we've heard so much about, Bart Ehrman says, stop talking about Jesus not being a person. He is a historic person. There was a crucifixion. Don't deny those things. Those are historic. What he denies is what it all meant. He denies the resurrection. He denies the miracles. He denies anything supernatural. And so it is historic that people died when Jesus was on the earth, that people were being crucified. He was a person who was crucified. What is debated by progressives is why and what happened afterward.
With that way of thinking, there's no hope for them. Where's their hope?
And there again, that is the God of your own making who offers us nothing. I think about when we lose, I don't know, my parents have been on my mind, I guess getting close to Christmas. And I think, I'm comforted knowing that I will see them again. If we have no hope, except, well, their legacy lives on, but that's going to pass. The older I get, the fewer people remember my parents. That's gonna die out in time. So that's not very comforting, that they lived good lives and were examples. When we are in crisis, if we don't have Jesus to cling to, if we don't know that God has a plan, we really are sunk. And so you're right, Susan. It is a God of their making, and it really offers no hope and no comfort. So in their minds, as we said, Jesus died to be an example of nonviolent resistance. Jesus died because the people wanted bloodlust, and he satisfied that. There are all these, it was a myth. He was put to death, but he didn't rise from the dead. All of that is out there. And they come up with a lot of different reasons of why he died. It's for social justice. It's for an example of someone who was oppressed.
But that doesn't make sense either, because how many of these people that say that would do the same thing? Well, you wouldn't. So
No, you wouldn't.
There has to be a reason, a meaning.
It does. And I think that if you've read anything of J. Warner Wallace says, you would not die if you knew you were dying for a lie.
Yeah, of course.
And the disciples all were put to death because they wouldn't say, no, it didn't happen. They would not have done it if they knew it was a lie. And they're the ones who saw him resurrected. So they can't say that, they couldn't say, no, he didn't.
Peter denied 3 times.
Peter denied.
And then turned around and said, you're going to have to crucify me upside down.
Yeah.
He went from being scared to undeniable
Exactly.
unwavering faith.
Exactly.
So what changed? Well, the resurrection.
That's exactly right. And I love Peter. I just love Peter. There is not anybody, when I am messing up at my worst, I think there's Peter. Thank you, Lord, for Peter. But, you're right. Peter denied Christ and then turned around and becomes a great preacher and is crucified upside down because he says he was unworthy to be crucified the same way the Lord was. You don't do that if you know it's a lie. And so, we have the benefit today of having so much historic evidence. It's been there all along, but we have concrete evidence that they did die for what they believed and what they knew to be true, not a story they heard. Somebody said I said this to someone else, and they said, well, terrorists, smash into buildings like at 9/11, and what they believed was not true, but they died for it, but they believed it to be true.
Right.
The disciples knew one way or the other. They knew they had seen the risen Christ or they had not. And so when they were saying it, they weren't believing, I think Paul says, cleverly developed tales. They were seeing they were saying what they saw. And that's the whole difference.
That's going back to sources. People that blow themselves up now because they believe this or they believe that, or they do believe. 100%.
They believe.
They believe. But go back to the source of their belief. And Peter. I mean, an eyewitness. That's if you're investigating a crime. That's where you want to go to.
Yeah.
Your eyewitnesses. So I'm going to believe.
Yeah, it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
And you nailed it exactly. It is eyewitness. An eyewitness to this is saying, I will die because I saw it. I know it to be true. And we have that witness as well. So, let's go on. Let's look at some critical thinking here. We'll go one more. Yep. This is by Rachel Held Evans, and she says, Jesus came to die, they often say, referring to a view of Christianity that reduces the gospel to a transaction. That's Richard Rohr language, it's a transaction. Whereby God needed a spotless sacrifice to atone for the world's sin and thus sacrificed Jesus on the cross so believers could go to heaven. In this view, Jesus basically shows up to post our bail. So where are the grains of truth in what is said there?
Well, we had to have a sacrifice.
There had to be a sacrifice.
And God does not accept sin, so he had to have that.
Yeah, God does not accept sin. He can't look on sin. And so there had to be a sacrifice, a spotless sacrifice.
At one time.
A one time, once for all. Okay? And so Jesus was sacrificed on the cross. I would quarrel. Well, let me ask you, where are the flaws?
He didn't post our bail.
He didn't post our bail.
And it's not a transaction.
It's not a transaction.
That's banking.
The way I have processed it just from reading, it's, yes, we were taught that there is a sacrifice. That's what the priests were told to do, sacrifice for our sins. Sin had to be destroyed. And the only way you can destroy sin would have been to destroy all of us.
Right.
And Jesus said, don't do that, I'll take it. So it's not a transaction where God says, I gotta have a death,
Yeah,
pick somebody.
really.
Mhm.
Sin has to be destroyed because God cannot look on sin. And
Exactly.
if he did what, if I were in charge, I probably would have done is just, but he loves us. And so Jesus said, I'll stand in for him.
I'll stand in. That's exactly, no one else could have paid the price. He was the only person without sin.
Right,
He was the only spotless sacrifice.
right.
The other thing I would quarrel with, just a little bit, is I don't think Jesus died on the cross so believers could go to heaven. I think believers going to heaven is kind of a byproduct. It's an extra bonus. He died on the cross so we could be in fellowship with God.
Right.
And
Eternally.
eternally,
Yes.
Plus,
we could be in fellowship.
basically post our bail, that trivializes the sincerity and the whole thing.
It
Well,
very
is
much,
an insult.
Yeah,
it is
insulting.
absolutely, it's an insult. It does trivialize it because they don't believe.
Yeah.
Because they don't
If
believe.
you get your bail posted, you still have to pay the price. Whereas Jesus didn't post our bail, he paid the whole price and took the punishment.
Yeah,
He did it all.
oh,
Good job, good job.
Good
John.
job.
yeah.
So the next slide, who has, I kept telling Melanie, I'm forgetting something. I forgot my Bible. Okay. I know. All day long I kept texting her, I know I'm forgetting something. My bag is packed. I know I've forgotten something.
And I just told
There
her
we
to make
go.
sure she had her pants on.
That's what she said.
That's what I said.
John 10, 11 through 18. Will somebody read it? That's the other part I was forgetting to say.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling, does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not his fold, or not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd.
Okay, let's,
And therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father.
Okay, so let's look at these questions. Thank you, Dan. Let's look at these questions. What do we learn about his death, about Jesus' death, through that passage?
He gave himself willingly
It was willing, it was a willing sacrifice,
because he loves us.
and because he loved us. What do we find out about the who, what, why, and how of the cross?
Well, it had to be an unblemished,
Mhm.
no fault, for the forgiveness of our sins, and the death on the cross was significant in that and of itself.
He knew that we can't do it ourselves.
Right.
We have, God.
Yeah, nobody
We
else
can't.
could have done it.
Nobody else.
Nobody else could do it, which should be, I mean, it's very clear. And so I think that's part of what makes it so hard for us to understand progressive thinking, is it is so clear. The hireling wouldn't do it. A false god wouldn't do it. Somebody else couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. Who else would give their lives willingly this way? How does it, well, I think we just talked about how it refutes progressives' arguments. What threats do the sheep in the passage face?
The wolf.
Danger,
The
the
wolf.
wolf in sheep's clothing too.
And a wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't forget that one. And what protections and pleasures do the sheep experience?
They trust their shepherd.
They trust their shepherd. They know their shepherd is not going to lead them into danger.
They know his voice.
They know his voice.
Yes.
You know, I think it's such a beautiful illustration, sheep and a shepherd. There's such a kindness there. I think of shepherds as being gentle, even though they were kind of rugged people. Yeah. But I think of them caring for the sheep and making sure their sheep were taken care of and provided for. Jimmy told a story this morning in church about the shepherd knows his sheep. The shepherd knows how to take care of his sheep and what is best for them. And so in his story, there was a shepherd with a bunch of sheep out in the countryside, and someone drove up in a fancy car and said, "You've got quite a few sheep here. I bet you I can tell you exactly how many sheep you have. If I get the number right, will you give me one?" And the shepherd said, "Yeah, I'll give you one if you get the number right." And so he pulled out his data trackers and linked up with satellites, and he came back and he finally said, "There are 1,792 sheep." And he said, "You're right. That's how many sheep there are." And he says, "So I'm going to take one of your sheep." And he said, "Okay, but can I have it back?" And so he takes the sheep and he puts it in his car. And he said, "Now, can I have it back if I can guess your profession?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll make that deal." And so he says, you're a consultant. And he says, "How did you ever guess that I'm a consultant?" He said, "I didn't guess." He said, "You came here uninvited." You started asking questions that I already had the answers to. And you don't know what you're dealing with. And I do know what I'm dealing with. And so I've explained this. Now give me my dog back. So, yeah, the shepherd knows what he's doing. And I think of the hireling who won't lay his life down for the sheep. It's not his responsibility.
Did Jimmy give that illustration?
Jimmy gave that illustration.
Yay.
And just to show that he loved us, he left the 99 to go get that one and didn't say, "Oh, it's just one, I'm just gonna let it,
Yeah.
go." He went and investigated.
He went and got, I mean, that's another touching thing, that he will go to any lengths to save us. He is always seeking us if we will just be found. I'm sorry, that gets a little emotional. Let's move on. We're going to move on actually now to the conclusion. which would be chapter 12. And since we're not going to be here next week, that's what we would be doing. So we're going to shorten it and do something else, and something that my computer's not doing right. Okay. I did want to mention, Elisa, in the book, Elisa talks in chapter 12 about reconstructing. Today she says she believes she never deconstructed. She doesn't use that term anymore. She said because when progressives are deconstructing, they're not really looking for answers. They're looking for problems and more questions, and the answer is not that important. Do you remember in the book where she said she would go home and she's searching for answers, and she would come back the next week with all of her materials and they had moved on to the next problem? And so she said she was always looking for truth. And so she couldn't say that she actually deconstructed. And I think that's important, the search for truth versus the search for more questions. Sean McDowell said that when he was younger, he went through a time of questioning, and he went to his dad. And he said, you're, kind of a famous apologist, and here I am. I don't know if I believe or not. I don't want to hurt your ministry, but I don't know what I believe. I don't know if I believe at all. And his dad said, you search. But what I want you to give me your word is that you will search for truth. And years later, and he said, so their relationship was never damaged. He had his dad's blessing of you go out and search. And he said to his dad years later, when he had really committed himself, he said, were you scared? Did it make you nervous? And he said, no. He said, first of all, I knew how strong our relationship was, that you would come to me with questions if you got bogged down. And second, the truth is the truth. As long as you're searching for the truth, you are going to find it. And so I think that's something that's really important. When we have friends and family who are searching, if we can help keep them looking for truth, I think that's a big step. Keep the relationship, help them search for truth. On the next slide, there may be, or I think there are, benefits of questioning and discarding false beliefs. Have you ever believed something that you maybe is not true?
Probably.
Have you ever believed something about the Bible or God that maybe wasn't true?
Like the Bible doesn't say, God helps those who help themselves.
God helps those who help themselves, and how many people believe it's there?
And God won't put any more on you than you can handle.
God won't put any more on you than what you can handle. Daily, there is more on us than we can handle. Without the Lord, we are sunk. Those are all things that people think are in the Bible, and we come to discard those as we study more and as we learn more. I think that sometimes, and I think in the Baptist church, we have a pretty solid understanding, but I think that there are denominations, and I'll tell you what, we had our house, some work done on our house recently, and the contractor and I got into a lot of discussions about baptism. And his denomination believes if you are not baptized, you are not saved. And so as we kept talking about that, you remember that long ending of Mark that says you must be baptized? That's where he's facing it. And it's in that long ending, as we can talk about that may or may not have been original. Is it new doctrine? Is it verified by anything else? I don't know that he will ever change his beliefs, but that is not an accurate belief. I hope he'll change his belief. But things like that we can, things that are maybe traditions that we start taking as gospel, and they're not. At my church, coming up in January, we're going to be doing a study on the Screwtape Letters. And one of the things that C.S. Lewis says about in the Screwtape Letters, that the advice that the senior demon is giving to a lesser demon, is get people to think about what their idea of church should be, and then let them be disappointed, and you can drive them away from the Lord. Because we start to believe that those traditions or the way that we celebrate communion is different from the way they celebrate communion, so they can't be right. And if my church does anything different, they can't be right either. And so some of those things we can discard because they're not true gospel. They're not the core of the gospel. Now, we're going to talk just briefly, how can we help those going through a time of questioning, doubt, or faith? How can we help them out? We want to spend some time talking about that tonight. So on the next slide, we're going to have two models, the Marilyn model and the Miriam model. And Melanie's going to talk about the Marilyn model. Her mother is Marilyn, my mother is Miriam. That's where this comes from.
And I didn't know I was doing this until like a few minutes ago, but we've talked about it, and when we're walking, we say the whole world would be a lot better off if they were raised by Marilyn and Miriam, apparently. Look at the examples. But they're very different. And the Marilyn model, so I come home and say, Mom, you know, I was talking to my friends, and this whole thing about going to hell forever, that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, you sin, but it's just one sin. It's temporary, and God wouldn't send people to hell forever because that just doesn't make any sense. I just don't think I can believe that. And Marilyn would say, what are you talking about? You know better than that. You know, we have talked about that. I knew I shouldn't let you hang around those people. If they wanted to jump off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? Go come in your room. I mean, this is what Marilyn, but she actually, I mean, this is caricature. No mothers have been defamed in this conversation. But truly, I mean, that was the initial, it was always, but then there was talking, because my mother, I get my love of books and reading and study from my mother, and I actually saw my mother become a Christian and grow to become a Christian, and so there was always discussion, but you don't argue with Marilyn too much, you take it. So we have to kind of, you know, you have to know the dynamic of your family, but you've got to know your own initial reaction and maybe temper it and keep that relationship. So yeah, Mom's 92, but still. And then there's the Miriam.
Yeah, I told Melanie.
Yes,
Sorry. That one thing about the Marilyn method, the trouble is, she was always right.
No, it drove me crazy.
You know?
I used to say if I could catch her wrong just once. But she's always right.
Yeah. And you already know the Miriam model. My mother never got flustered. We went through, I know we drove her insane, but Mother, I don't believe in hell anymore. I think, you know, you don't get punished forever for doing something wrong and da-da-da-da-da, going through that whole thing, and Mother would go, huh. And there was this silence that you had to fill. And so you would keep talking until you were just reduced to understanding that what you just let come out of your mouth made no sense. Mother, again, I mean, she was just, And as I said, it gets very uncomfortable to have this silence. And so you would talk more. My mother was a very gentle person. And she, like Melanie's mother, the closeness of the family was what really carried things through. Because it was not a dismissive, It really was something about, tell me more. Let's talk to me more. And we talked. My mother was this kind of person where the famous story in our family is my mother and I decided to drive to California. I had a brother in California. It wasn't just like, California. I had a brother in California. We were going to go out and see him. My dad went to AAA. Do you remember when you would go to AAA, you get the triptych and all of these maps and all of the books about all of the hotels along the way? And he had lined up on his workbench, on his table, he had mapped out our route across the country. And he knew how many miles we were supposed to drive each day. He had, everything was mapped out. And while he was going to be here, he was keeping up with us all day long, where we were. And so the first night we were gone, we were supposed to call home every night. The first night we were gone, Daddy said, well, you should be right around Texas today. Where are you? Mother said, we're in Opelika. We stopped everywhere we could. We had shopped, we had eaten. Daddy said 3 days later, he just ripped the map up. He said, I can't stand it anymore. But Mother was a lot of fun. And we did a lot of things together. And there was that peacefulness that was part of her. And that's what allowed the questioning and the continuing to go on. And I'll tell you, she went through some rebellious times with my siblings. But, and so by the time I came around, she had honed those skills, let me tell you what. But it was a different way, but it was the relationship. And just like with Marilyn, it's the relationship. If we can keep that relationship with our families, we've gone a long way. Now, when we go to other people, and this, Melanie and I talked about it, if I'm talking to my students, I can't just go, because they're going to just go do what they want to do. I don't have that relationship. And so where other people outside family and outside that circle of relationship, you do some relationship building. And we're going to go back and review on the next slide how we can help when that relationship is not built in is remembering Greg Kokel and the Columbo method. And if you remember, we went to Colossians 4, 5, and 6, where we get the 3 key phrases: be smart, be nice, and be tactical. Always be prepared with an answer. So we have to be smart. We have to know our stuff so that we can be graceful in giving the right answer and taking the right approach.
Or ask questions so they can clarify what they exactly mean.
Exactly.
So that you can go from there.
And that is the Columbo method in a nutshell. He used questions. Columbo, if you remember Columbo, he was always going, the just one more thing, but he would say, you're a lot smarter than I am. Tell me, why would somebody do this? Why would somebody do that? How would it work if this happened? I wonder what would, and people were just ready to, rip his hair out because he had so many questions, but he got to the truth by asking and asking. And he also found when things didn't line up correctly, and he could kind of zero in on those things where you said this, but now you're saying this. And if that was that way, then how could this be this way? He would work that together. And then there was always the just one more thing, so you never quite got away from the questioning. But his first step, he says, what is so important about that first step of, tell me what you mean by that. Can you go deeper there? Explain that to me. I think that was really what my mom was doing a lot of times was, tell me more. She didn't verbalize the tell me more, but that's what was there. What are we talking about here? And being able to have that, one more slide, sorry. Being able to ask those questions of, what do you mean by that? It gives us a free education. We find out where they are in their thinking, but also it becomes very engaging. If you read anything, How to Win Friends and Influence People, all of those sorts of things tell you, be interested in the other person. When we ask that question, we are interested, and then they're more interested in what we have to say.
And listen.
They're listening, and we are listening. They're more willing to listen to us if we are listening to them. It does show genuine interest when we are asking those questions and listening to the answers. it forces them to think. And I think that's especially important today when a lot of times people are just spouting memes. They're not really talking about what they believe. They're talking about something catchy that they read. They're repeating something catchy that they read without thinking about what it really means. And it takes pressure off. It takes pressure off of us because we don't have to have all of the answers. We're gathering information, and we don't have to keep coming up with answers for issues, for things that they bring up. Because when somebody says, well, this is what I believe, and you follow that up with tell me a little bit more, they tell you a little bit more, and that brings up another question. They are the ones who, Greg Kokel says, they're the ones on the hot seat, not me, because they are defending their position. And that's the next question. He says they have the burden of proof then. The person who brings the argument has the burden of proof. So if somebody tells me, I don't believe in hell anymore, it's up to you to tell me why not. You have the burden of proof, not me. I don't have to prove why I believe there is because you didn't question me. You brought up your point, and so let's talk through. And like my mother, who you had to fill the space, they can start deconstructing their own thinking and sometimes even come around to this doesn't make sense. Greg Kokel uses the example of being in a store once where he saw, it was somebody wearing a pentagram. And he asked her, he said, I see that you're wearing a pentagram. Does that have religious significance to you? And she said, yes, it does. I'm a pagan. And he said, what's a pagan? And she said, which is, what do you mean by that? What's a pagan? And she says, well, we believe that everything all life forces are important, and we try to do this. And, she had a long list of things that I can't remember. And he said, then you must be, does that mean that you would be pro-life? If all life forces are important, does that mean you would be pro-life? And she said, no, I believe in choice. I believe women have a choice to make. And she said, now, personally, I couldn't kill a baby. And he said, right then when she said, I couldn't kill a baby, he said, I don't talk about killing babies. He said, but she put it on the table. And so I can say then, why do you think it's okay for you to say you couldn't do it, but it's okay for somebody else to do it? And he said, you could see the wheels are turning of, if it's wrong for me, why is it right for you?
And why are you following?
And why are you following somebody who says it's right if you believe it's wrong for me? And so it's planting those seeds and making people realize sometimes what I'm thinking and just spouting sometimes isn't even logical. I don't even agree with what I'm saying. And so it's a way of helping people to clarify their thinking. And he uses the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Because they need to provide the evidence. When someone says, it's cosmic child abuse, the cross is cosmic child abuse, how did you come to that conclusion? What's your evidence for that? And people have to start thinking. And Greg Kokel, and I think this is so important, he says, there used to be a model where you would just present the plan of salvation and people would say yes or no. And it's not that way anymore. He thinks of it much more in terms of a garden, and we are all gardening. We are planting seeds, we are cultivating, we are nurturing, and sometimes we're the ones who make the harvest and sometimes we're not. And he says he's made very few harvests in his life, but he's planted a lot of seeds and he's cultivated a lot of ground. And it's that kind of just, when somebody has put something in your mind and you realize that this doesn't make sense, what I just said doesn't make sense, does it keep you up at night? I mean, don't you start thinking, what to do with this? I've got to start researching, I've got to start looking, I've got to start thinking. And that's what we are doing when we're asking those kinds of questions. What kind of evidence? What's your evidence for that? And if we can get people looking for evidence, they have a chance of finding truth. And I think that's just so important. He also says explanation is not evidence. So just explaining, well, I believe this because I saw one time I read an article about it. That's an explanation. That's not evidence. What is the evidence for what you believe?
Sadly, today, in a lot of colleges, people, they hear something without even realizing what they're believing, and then they repeat it. Oh, this is what I believe, but they have no clue. So the relationship comes in and is important there, so you can form that, so you can have a proper discussion about it for clarification, because they don't know why they're following it or what.
Exactly. And, you know, we've talked about it before. A lot of times kids are in college classes, and you know, I think I told you I went back to college a couple of years ago, and you want to please your teacher. You know, the night before my first class, my husband came into the room where I had all of my nice little notebooks lined up and all my pencils sharpened. And I'm 68 years old at the time, people. I've got all my pencils, I'm sitting there and my notebooks all lined up. And my husband asked me a series of questions, and the last question he asked me was, what do you hope about these courses? And I said, I hope my teacher likes me. I am 68 years old, and the best I can do is I hope my teacher likes me. But it's the truth. These are people in authority. We want them to like us and respect us. And when we come up against people, I was in American Women, the American Women's course. The first night of class, the professor said there are 4 pillars of American womanhood. The first one is purity. Thank goodness we don't believe that anymore. The next one is piety. Nobody believes in that anymore. And she went down the list just saying, you know, this is all hogwash. And there are a bunch of kids there, youngsters there, who are like, whoa, she's so smart. And you know, she's saying stuff that I kind of like hearing, because I don't want to go to church on Sunday morning, I want to sleep. And it's something, she and I developed a relationship of sorts. As it happened, because I wasn't a regular student, I had access to her background information because I had access to her bio. And I knew she went to a Bible college in Missouri. I went to the Bible college in the same town. We were on different parts of town, different churches. And so every chance I had, I reminded her, when you were in chapel at Drury, I was in chapel at CBC. How was that? Wasn't that cool? And so she really toned down all the rhetoric, because there was somebody who wasn't willing to just back down. And I could do that in part because I wasn't a 20-year-old who was a little bit scared of the teacher. And that's not fair.
And wanted a good grade.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted a good grade too, but I mean, we were on a different footing, and she wasn't aware of it because she didn't know that I was an instructor. So we were on a little bit different footing than if I had been an 18-year-old. If I had been 18, 20 years old, I don't know if I could have spoken up. We have to be aware of that. But our kids are being told things, and they're being indoctrinated very often with things that I had my critical thinking professor said, we're not going to talk religion or politics. Nobody can understand, you know, everybody's got hard opinions about politics, and nothing can be proven with religion. End of discussion. So he's just said it doesn't make any sense without really saying anything, without saying it doesn't make any sense. He just said it doesn't make any sense, and he said it to, you know, 50 kids. And so we have to be aware that these things are there. We have to be counteracting some of that at home. Now, the first 2 steps are what do you believe and why do you believe it? Sometimes when you're using Columbo, you get into a situation where you don't know the answer. Somebody will come up with something and you feel like, where do I go from here? And he has a step for that that is brilliant, to get out of the hot seat. To get out of the hot seat, what he says the method is to say, wow, you've given this a lot of thought. You've given this a lot more thought than I've given it. How about if we meet for coffee next week? I'm gonna do some research. And then you do your research, you come back, but you've maintained a relationship and you've built them up that they have done some thinking. Now they're gonna put in some study, I'm gonna put in some study, we're gonna have another conversation. So we're building that relationship that you were mentioning so that we've got another foundation to build on. And when I get in the hot seat again, I'm gonna have another cup of coffee with them the next week. But it's a good way to build them up, build up the relationship, and give us time to figure it out and to get good resources. Now, there are a lot of other tools that COCL has. I almost said that Colombo has. A lot of other tools that COCL has. He has views that self-destruct. If you just keep asking questions, you find out that what you were saying doesn't make sense. Absurd conclusions, that we draw conclusions from information and they're not related. And all of this is in the book Tactics. And it is a phenomenal book. If you haven't read it, you need get it. It's great. Street Smarts, Melanie has completed.
He's written a new book called Street Smarts, which takes a lot of what's in Tactics, but he goes into more of teaching some apologetics and then using the tactics to help people think through that. But one thing that Greg Kokel says about his tactics in Street Smarts, he says this isn't something just for apologetics or for teaching. He said this is common decency, that we're so busy in our world today of just telling people, well, it's this way, you know, and you agree with me or, you know, whatever. He said, this is how you treat your spouse. This is how you treat your children. Ask questions, talk to them, get them to talk to you. He said, this is something we all need to work on for more than just apologetics.
Mm-hmm. It's good advice. You know, I need to ask my husband sometimes instead of just telling him.
Well, and we never know what that little bit of kindness or patience or understanding will change the view, because they are struggling and we gave them that opportunity.
That's right. That's right. Kindness goes a long way. So, Tactics is a book I recommend. I have not finished Street Smarts, but I know that it will be good because everything Greg Kokel does is good. So, as we close out, and we are actually 4 minutes over, think about things that you'll take with you, insights you'll take with you. Anybody want to share something that you're going to think after the class is over, like tonight? I know that's putting everybody on the spot. I get it. You know, I think one of the things after reading Elisa's book and after, especially after going through it with our church and now this church, is thinking how pervasive progressive theology is and how easily it can slip into a church if we're not careful. It's just everywhere. And some of it sounds reasonable and some of it sounds logical until you take it apart and you realize, no, this is conflicting with the Bible. And, you know, having that one true standard is so important. Making sure that we can defend that true standard is important.
I think one of the dangers is if you didn't have a background, a good foundation, that you go to a church that is progressive, you'll just go along with the flow.
Yeah.
But if you have some sort of foundation, that progressive movement will kind of, you know, bother you. It's just like her. Alicia, she heard this stuff and it bothered her. She knew that wasn't right. So then she found the answers, you know. But we need to start planting the seed and getting that foundation, get the truth out so that people can recognize the truth versus, or at least have an idea and then search themselves. You know? had that little Holy Spirit saying, hey,
Yeah.
you know, this isn't the right way.
I agree with that. I think your church is working with you said your youth director works with apologetics with young people. That's going to prepare them
Right.
so that when they hear professors say something or they hear high school teachers say something, it's going to be a rock in their shoe. And then they've got a relationship with their youth minister, they've got a relationship with their parents that they can say, whoa, something is off here.
Well, that's like what you're saying, though, that we've all grown up, go to college, listen to your professors, get a good grade, go to church, listen to what, you go to church and they're telling you the wrong thing, and you go to college and they're telling you the wrong thing, got
There you go.
no
Yeah.
hope
Except we,
in life unless one of us takes the time and stands up and says, and fight back against it, because it really is. We're telling our kids, hey, go out, listen to them, listen to them, listen to them, and then when they come back spouting nonsense, we're like, wait, where did that come from?
yeah. And that's, I think it's so important. Red Pen Logic, Tim Burton, Burdett, Red Pen Logic, says one of the most important things, he said, it's something that he has started doing because he said, I like to study my Bible when everything is quiet. So he puts the kids to bed and then he has his private Bible study. And he said, I realized I am robbing my children of seeing me study the Bible and take joy in studying the Bible. And that's something we can do at home. He said now he keeps his kids up. He doesn't keep them up. He studies the Bible earlier so that they can study with him. And he said it takes longer. It's harder to do. I have more explaining to do, but they now have seen the joy of finding that. And that's something we can all do. We can do that with our kids, with grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. We can do that. One thing that I can't remember who said it, but an apologist said, the good thing about progressives is that they examine the Bible so carefully to take it apart that they are reading the Bible.
Yeah.
And the Holy Spirit
Can work through that.
can work through that. And that's something that I think, if there's a positive to come out of progressives, the Lord is working, the Spirit is working, and He knows the heart that is receptive. And so I think that's where we put our hope, is that the Spirit will prompt people. And prompt people to come to somebody who knows, like you, and say, let me stand up and not be afraid.
At least you gotta open your mind.
Somebody who is learning and says, let me learn with you. Let's learn together. And let's develop a relationship where we can do that. So I know we're over. So I've had a good time. Don't forget, next weekend is the Night in Bethlehem on Saturday night. If you want to drive downtown, this year it's
Worth it.
it's worth it.
What is
A Night in Bethlehem. It's
You drive through and see the displays around
it's really worth seeing. This year, First Baptist is joining with Holy Family and St. Luke, so it'll be a much expanded version. And it really, you go through and you go through the census takers, because that's what they were doing in Bethlehem. And it's so we can get a count. But
You just drive
Follow
through
it.
and they've
Yeah.
got displays going, and you'll see like the story, like you'll see the Bethlehem, the town, and you'll see where Mary and Joseph, you drive through, you see the angels, the shepherds, and
the wise men.
the
It's a
wise
drive-through.
men. And
It's a drive-through,
yeah, you
and
do that.
there's a station you put your radio on, and it talks you through.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Yep.
It is
So
really cool.
it really is quite good. So, do you want to close this out? I'm sorry?
What time does it start?
I don't remember, but it goes on forever. Because it's a long line of cars to get through there. And I mean, it's so interesting because the people are shopping, in the town, and they just kind of make their way back and start shopping all over again. And so it's just, the way that it works out is things are just constantly moving. And so wherever you are in the line, you get to see the whole story. and you never miss anything. So, I want to say, I think it starts around 6 o'clock. It'll be dark, I'm pretty sure. 6 to 8 maybe, something like that.
Looking at your
At our website.
website.
Yeah. What's amazing, you realize, and we hear about the manger, we hear about the shepherds, and we don't think about people were just doing their own thing that night. Without an awareness